mind, are you? You read my mind.
I have no need to, do I?
What's the third line? Page 51.
About to smile beneath her whispering wings. Still more proof, John Clark?
Psychopomps oversee one of the most fundamental functions of the multiverse, the progress of mortal souls. Through this infinite cycle of lives, deaths, and rebirths, the forces of the planes calibrate and evolve. Psychopomps serve as caretakers of this process, yet no matter their might or influence, they all know their place, their duty, and their shared secret. That the order of the planes is not perfect, and that one distant day it will end. For most psychopomps, this burdensome truth reinforces the great need for their diligence in fending off the decay of all things. For others, it is an onrushing nihilistic destiny. And for the most brazen and selfish psychopomps, it is a reason to rebel. Those psychopomps that dissent are known as the Sahkils, not content to serve as clerks in an endlessly deteriorating cycle of meaningless lives. These former psychopomps abandon their duties, escaping the strictures of their previous brethren. They flee to the empty places of reality, most congregating in the misty ethereal plane. There, where the great procession of newly departed souls marches endlessly towards judgment, death's rebels remake themselves, embracing the dread with which mortals already view them. They restyle themselves as tyrants of terror. No longer servants to the soul, they would become their terrifying masters. Reality's days might be numbered, but for those finite eons, Sahkils resolve to rule. Sahkils bear little resemblance to the psychopomps they once were. Although some embrace the morbidity of their former brethren, most Sahkil forms are inspired by common or particularly potent mortal fears. Unnatural fusions, insectile limbs, and bloody phantasmagoras abound in their Sahkil shapes, each designed and destined to terrify. The least Sahkils have the most recognizable forms, familiar limbs seemingly twisted by unimaginable excruciations. The greatest of their kind, though, are near indescribable horrors, obscene in both shape and proportions. Yet, Sahkils share the single drive to give all creatures reason to fear. From the ethereal plane, Sahkils watch. They slip tenuous tendrils into the dark and abandoned places of the world, infusing the mundane with dread and giving fangs to mortal imaginings. When they trespass upon the material plane, most Sahkils prefer to remain veiled, corrupting nature and turning people into monsters. They revel in the awe associated with terror and hear praises in every scream. When their victims have finally been sapped, drained of their capabilities to hope and fear, the Sahkil feed. Not willing to let their playthings escape to feed the cycle they once served, Sahkils delight in nothing more than tearing mortal souls apart or giving rise to blasphemous undead. The most dangerous Sahkils rise to dominate their brethren as nightmare warlords. Those Sahkil tormentors form vast, sanity-bending realms from which only tortured sounds escape. Unique in form and objectives, these demigods gather legions of Sahkil servitors, uniting them in campaigns targeting vulnerable souls, entire mortal worlds, or even rival tormentors. Regardless of their goals, Sahkil tormentors are the most secretive members of their race, cloaking themselves to preserve the terror of their true faces, or sometimes to hide the beings they once were. As Sahkils viciously impede the multiverse's workings, these gluttons of fear are widely loathed. Nearly every celestial and lawful race opposes their selfish desires, hunting them as dangerous beasts and metaphysical brigands. Psychopomps most actively oppose Sahkil interference with the progress of souls, yet rarely display racial malice towards these traitors. Additionally, the Manasaputras violently resent Sahkil schemes, as Sahkil predation actively impedes the development of mortal souls. This often results in dutiful Manasaputras or their agents defending the vulnerable spirits or leading quests to liberate worthy souls before they're destroyed. The Sahkil are not without allies though. Divs in their campaigns to spread misfortune and ruin among mortals respect the motivation of the Sahkils and sometimes work with them to spread fear. Equally nihilistic, the end-seeking daemons delight in Sahkil's destruction of mortal souls and their hastening of the end times. Chitons too have a distant admiration for the avant-garde masterpieces of insanity and terror that Sahkils work upon mortal minds. A fractious group of warlike warlords dominate vast numbers of the Sahkil, and they have been most effective in their goals of their race, amassing power and worship through terror. Some of these have been known by many names, such as the Typhon Wheel, the Darkness Behind You, Upon an Empty Throne, the One Out of Place, the Vermilion Mother, the Flying Scab, and the Skin That Walks on Teeth. Espel, this creature's stout canine torso tops a slimy mass resembling an earthworm. Disgusting veins dangle from its face. Epsels prey upon the unease that comes with living with beasts. The civilized world has domesticated animals, but those creatures are just one step away from wild animals. And Epsels make sure that humanoids who live around them remember that. They integrate themselves with humanoids by acting like loving pets. Then they delight in aggressive episodes, barking and snapping until called down by their masters. They return to fawning obedience for a time, until their next inevitable outburst. Instead of gashing jaws, an Epsel's bite involves a lashing mass of fleshy veins and viscera that can grab its opponents. An Epsel uses this attack to distract their opponents, savaging entangled victims with their vicious claws until their masters can pull them away. Although an Epsel's ability to frighten its victims is potent, it relies on using its spells when grossly outnumbered, outmatched, or greatly injured. Epsels like to fight and scrap with nearly anything, and they prefer their victims not to simply flee in terror, as they wish to savor the fear. Epsels use their telepathic abilities to harass would-be opponents into attacking first, flinging mental taunts that are vulgar and disconcerting. Once they engage, they are resilient and dogged fighters. An Epsel stands 1 foot tall at the shoulder and has a thin, worm-like body that stretches for nearly 3 feet. An Epsel weighs about 13 pounds. Although they make unruly companions, Epsels actually enjoy serving those mightier than themselves, taking pride in their master's power. Even if they continue to snap and snarl when given commands, a neutral evil spellcaster may find them useful as a familiar. Kemon. These monstrous misshapen skulls top a twisted trunk balanced on 3 leg-like splinters of flesh and bone. Kemon appear as 3 enormous fused humanoid skulls with mouths full of jagged fangs sitting atop an ever-shifting mass of limbs and faces. These latter manifestations constantly try to pull free of Kemonhal's bulk, shrieking and wailing in fear. Sometimes a creature gazing into this fluctuating horror often sees a face that is too familiar, a scolding parent, an old bully, or a lost lover. This may or may not be real, as the terrifying form stretching out from the Kemonhal's body incorporate both images of the viewer's mind and those of creatures that have fallen prey to the Kemonhal's eternal fear. A typical Kemonhal stands 25 feet tall and weighs over 10,000 pounds. When a Kemonhal telepathically communicates with those marked by its eternal fear, it constantly reminds them that they will never be good enough and that they are utter failures in everything that they do. These Sahkils derive a perverse amount of pleasure from these brief mental interjections, and those that have made their horrific impression on a large number of beings spend hours of every day engaged in this long-distance abuse. This lingering torment often drives a Kemonhal's victim insane, or it forces them into desperation as they attempt more and more drastic measures to rid themselves of the Sahkil's influence and predation. Many of these victims end up in the care of others, as their paranoia overtakes any ability for them to care for themselves, and they constantly worry over whether or not they can actually achieve anything on their own. Doubt and distrust seep into every thought, and the victim can't get this denigrating voice out of its head, and self-destruction seems like the only thing that can keep it at bay. Kemon hulls don't bother with those they consider lesser minds, unless their intention is to cause havoc or rampant violence. They instead focus on instilling the fear in the best and brightest they can find. Kemon hulls appreciate a challenge and even dedicate themselves to breaking down creatures that are immune to such fear. Kemon hulls delight in tormenting the brave and confident. These cruel outsiders track down great heroes and famed generals, women and men known for their courage and righteousness, and infect their otherwise strong minds with a static, constant fear. Kemon hulls share stories of their conquests with each other and any other Sahkils, bragging about the reduction of a once proud warrior to a twitchy, frightened child who jumps at the slightest noise. In combat, Kemon hulls combine the use of their spell-like abilities and their physical might. Enemies out of reach fall victim to a host of different effects meant to frighten or weaken, while those nearby are at risk of being trampled or snatched up by one of the Kemon hull's fanged mouths. The Kemon hull sometimes grabs enemies with their bite, and then use their snatch ability to bring victims to the ethereal plane. Once back on the ethereal plane, Kemon hulls bring their kidnapped victims into their lairs, where they and their Sahkil allies subject them to a host of frightening stimuli in hopes of driving them mad. Some of these victims linger in these prisons of terror for decades, while others die of fright outright, or take their own lives to escape the torture of constant dread. Otherwise, Kemon hulls do their best to keep their victims alive. Kemon hulls generally linger near a place on the ethereal plane where mortals peering into that realm might briefly glance upon their horrific visage. Most viewers can only catch a terrifying half-remembered glimpse of the Sahkil and go on their way, shaken but unscathed. Yet, if the viewer looks for too long into that hazy realm, a Kemon hull doesn't hesitate to expose the creature to its look of fear and eternal fear abilities, or attempt to even drag the victim back to its lair for a proper dose of terror. Kauche. Thorny vines and tiny red flowers grow from this emaciated woman and flow like a train behind her. Kauches feed on fear and insecurity of failing relationships. They delight in seeing social bonds shatter, as they know most mortals broken of spirit or set adrift by such conflicts are more susceptible to their malign influence. Consummate puppet masters, Kauches use their powers of domination to turn friends and lovers against each other. Relishing how even a single word can cause an avalanche of destruction, as panicked victims make their situations worse. Kauches then draw their despondent mortals to their side, playing cat and mouse games and slowly increasing the physical and psychological pressure until their quarry breaks. While they may sometimes work as intermediaries, these creatures prefer to personally witness the anxiety that they cause. Kauches stand 7 feet tall and weigh around 160 pounds. Quilok. Terrible jaws ringed with clawed arms open atop this towering mass of flesh. A probing tongue flops from another orifice. Quilok prey on the fear of not having enough, urging mortals to overindulge in every way possible. They are usually found hidden amongst kingdoms and lords' manors, making sure to instill the fear of not having enough in those who could take everything from those beneath them. They particularly savor the joy of crushing communities and undermining social bonds. Sometimes they may leave their haunting grounds, but they leave behind phobias that continue their devastation without their presence necessary. They're usually over 12 feet tall and can weigh up to 6,000 pounds. Vesak. Buzzing wings hold this gaunt creature just above the ground. A grasshopper serves as the creature's head. Vesaks prey on the fear of the creeping and the crawling and the buzzings of insects. Instead of whispering from the shadows, Vesaks blatantly present their unnerving insectile forms to frighten and demoralize humanoid mortals. Vesaks use their suggestion spells to coerce victims into terrifying circumstances and make them believe that their horrific actions are their own ideas. Vesaks savor their target's fear, drawing it out wherever possible. When facing a group of enemies, Vesak don't immediately attack foes affected by their fear effects, and instead try to frighten all possible enemies before delivering the killing blow so as to properly season their prey in terror. When these Sahkils do finally attack, their claws rip and tear flesh as easily as paper. Vesaks stand about 7 feet tall and have a 5-foot wingspan, weighing around 170 pounds. Check the description of this video to find some stat blocks for these unique monsters for your next 5th edition game.
Ha ha ha.